Welcome to Make a Path Presents. I'm Ronnie Hayes, and today, let's talk Negan's past. Now, this has to do with both comic book and TV Negan, and no, there's not going to be any spoilers whatsoever, and that's for the TV fans or maybe the comic book fans who are not caught up yet with Negan's backstory. And they haven't even released a lot of Negan's backstory as far as revealing, what brought Negan to this place. And we don't even really know yet how far they're going to go with his backstory. I have a feeling since they're already doing it, they're most likely going to bring it as far up as they can to where he meets Rick Grimes. They might not run it all the way to that point, but I think they're going to cover as much ground as they possibly can in the 48 pages they're going to do that. So needless to say, you don't need a spoiler warning for this video in case for whatever reason you're just not caught up or you're a TV only fan. Anyway, another thing too, I got like 9 videos in the works. I'm uploading this before them because there's a lot of editing involved. I can just upload this quick and get back to these other videos. I got mail videos. I got so much shit. It's incredible. Just I got breakdowns of the Fear the Walking Dead, Preacher, Outcast because of the hype for the Walking Dead trailer. I shit you not, totally forgot about Outcast and Preacher. Anyway, so I got it. I didn't even watch either one of those, so I got some catching up to do. But anyway, I was running some errands with my daughter today, and I was thinking, man, from a writer's perspective, what would be a good way to flesh out Negan's story so that way he's not just simply, the villain for the sake of being a villain. And I personally feel like when they flesh out villains, it makes them more iconic. You know what I mean? They're more memorable that way. And because you want Negan in for a good chunk of story, it just seems too simple to have him, okay, the villain, and then let's just dramatically do something different with him. Staying spoiler free. So then I was thinking, okay, Negan was when we first meet Negan was in a predicament where, not a predicament, but he was in a situation that he created, from what we know of, where he's controlling other communities. He cleans out the area, makes sure no one's fighting or going to war amongst each other, which is something we speculate. We don't know because they didn't cover that part of the story, but pretty much what we do know is he cleans the area of walkers, and we can guess he keeps everybody in line, meaning if one community was going to go to war with another community, which is an interesting idea, Negan, in my opinion, would most likely step in between them and be like, no, you both work for me, get your asses back in line, stop that bullshit. So, in reality, there might be a lot more there than we realize. Now, what I was thinking is, we see Negan for the first time come on the scene, pick one of Rick's guys, and beat him to death. But in Season 6, what was really interesting is they decided to put in some foreshadowing and flesh it out where we saw Glenn looking at Polaroids, which was not in the comic book. The Polaroids was of victims, previous victims, that had their heads bashed in. And there was a lot of them. And that idea sparked another idea, or that memory, thinking back to that, sparked another idea that I was like, holy fuck. We see this as the first time Negan shows up on the scene, but this isn't. Not in the comic book, not in the show. Negan's done this a number of times, meaning he picked one of their guys and he beat him to death. So essentially, Negan's becoming desensitized to this act. So later on when we see Negan and he's like, Rick, what's the big deal? I took a guy, I beat him to death, it's over, it's done with. Let's move past this and whatever. Negan's desensitized to that. And then I'm thinking, you know what, if we could, from a writer's perspective, if you wanted to get creative and kind of show Negan through a different perspective and still link to that moment where he beat someone to death, another possibility, or one possibility, is to put him in a position where his life is threatened, his people's lives are threatened, existence as they know it, as a community, as a group, or even sole survivors, their existence is threatened by whatever's happening in that circumstance. Maybe there's communities that are just at war with each other for whatever reason. The details don't matter right now. Maybe a battle breaks out, maybe there's a confrontation, maybe it's just a discussion, and Negan finally snaps, you know what I mean, because he realizes some of his people died, and this is all speculation. Some of his people died, and he needs to do something drastic to put people in check, you know, put them in line. So he says, you know what, fuck the talking, goes over, he grabs one of the other guys, you know, of the warring community, drags a guy in the middle of wherever they're talking, and he beats one of the guys to death with Lucille. That's the very first Lucille victim, and I do believe that's very, very important to show in the comic. I believe that will be one of the most, probably the second most iconic Lucille beatings, because right now we only have that one, technically. We have one of the survivors got killed. But if we see the very first, both in comic and show, eventually, if we see it, the very first Lucille beating, and if it's because of a set of circumstances that forced Negan's hand, where if Negan didn't step up and say, you know what, the bullshit is done. I'm taking your person, I'm going to beat him to death, and you're going to fall into line, or I'm going to individually drag your asses out here, and I will beat you each to death until you guys start falling in line. I think it sends a very powerful message, plus it shows us that, you know, in the beginning, Negan wasn't just, or he could just be like, I'm just going to do it. But I think it's a more powerful message to show that Negan was in a position where he had to do something drastic. So he does that. He does it once, you know. And then maybe he even tried talking, and there was just no talking. So he had to. And then maybe the second time, he's like, well, listen, you guys fall in line, or I'm going to beat one of you to death. And they don't. Maybe there's conflict. Maybe more of Negan's people get killed, something. So Negan captures them, surrounds them, beats one to death, puts them in check. Maybe he does this enough to where, again, he's desensitized. And on the show, we see a clear image of all those Polaroids, all those different heads. Maybe it gets to the point for him where he just thinks it's easier to grab a guy, beat him to death, and then everyone go about their business. You know, we can work together. We're allies now. I mean, forced allies, but whatever. As long as Negan's people aren't killing each other or going to war with other communities. And I was thinking about how much potential there is for his story to flesh it out a little more. And the idea that I want to leave you with, or the thought, is to remember we're always seeing the first appearance of Negan as the first, you know, Lucille victim, but it's not. In the comic book, that's not the first Lucille victim. We will later in the comic book, you know, play out with Negan's story through his Here's Negan backstory, and we're going to see the very first Lucille victim. And thinking back now, that's incredibly exciting. I can't wait to see how they flesh that story up where Negan decides. Did he just wake up one day and decide, you know what, I'm just going to do this? You know, how did he get to that point? It has to be a progression, I feel. I don't think he would just, you know, shit hits the fan and he walks outside, wraps barbed wire around a bat and says, I'm going to beat one person. You know what I mean? It's just, it's too clean to develop a story like that. So it has to be something where, you know, something happens, then something, and eventually it leads to Negan having this structure where he takes a guy, beats him to death, you all work for him. You get out of line, he's going to grab another guy, beat you to death, and then maybe that second spanking, you'll definitely learn, don't ever cross Negan again. You know what I mean? So keep that in mind. We see the very first Lucille victim from our perspective, from our standpoint, because that's the first time Negan's introduced into the story, but it's not the very first Lucille victim. So Negan, and this would explain why to Negan he doesn't understand, it's so personal to Rick and gang because that person meant a lot to them. So for Negan, it's like, dude, what are you still bugging about the Asian kid? I mean, it happened, big deal. You know what I'm saying? A lot of us died. You know, a lot of our people died in the past. I mean, move on. You know, why is it so difficult to move on? For the survivors, it was a different experience. With Negan, he's been desensitized. You know what I mean? So much to the point where, you know, it's not a big deal to him. Some interesting things to look back, because with Negan's introduction into the show and with his new backstory coming out, it is definitely looking like Negan's going to be around for a few years in the comic and the show. Again, staying spoiler free. Give me your thoughts and opinions about this. Have you thought about the very first Lucille victim, not the first we saw, but the very first one ever? Have you ever thought about what gives Negan the idea to set up a structure like this? You know, did he just see zombies and think, I'm going to use old school mafia tactics and shake people down essentially for supplies. I mean, something had to have happened where he's living in this new world, and then it's a slow progression to where it's like, okay, you know what? We need to get supplies. We have communities. They're fighting against each other. And then we got this other community. They robbed and killed like 10 of our guys who went out on a run. I mean, I think that's a very interesting idea, or a very interesting possibility for Negan's backstory, to see how they fleshed that out and pieced that together. Anyway, give me your thoughts and opinions about this topic. What do you think's coming up, and how interested are you to see Negan's backstory in both the comic and the show? I was about to say, I don't think it's going to be in the show like right away. Keep in mind, they're still fleshing it out and putting it out to the comic book readers over the next year. I think like 7 more months. So we have some time yet. You know what I mean? But with that said, thoughts and opinions in the comment box. I'm done talking. It's your turn. Subscribe now.